Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope your week has been going well. Been an interesting one, to say the least. I would like to call this meeting to order for the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Revenue. Welcome and thank you for everyone who is joining us online, and I will ask our committee fiscal staff, Mr. Reel, to call the roll.
Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Tatro.
Here.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Vice Chair Cohen.
Here.
And Chair Neal.
Here. Okay, so I would like to start the opening remarks under agenda item 2 with a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, the meeting material can be accessed on the committee's webpage, located on Nevada's legislative website. But I also want to make sure that for the chat feature, that you guys make sure that you do not post inside of the chat, that you actually use, it's only going to be used for IT and technical assistance. So if you have questions to the actual presenters, probably going to have to use that hand feature, because I am not using my legislative laptop today. So you can post your hand or wave your hand so I can see you, but make sure that you don't put anything in the actual chat feature unless it is a technical issue where we need IT or broadcast to get involved. In addition, I wanted to mention that if anyone is interested in receiving an electronic notification regarding the committee's agenda, minutes, and final report, you can do so by signing up on the legislative website. Any votes that are taken today will be done by show of hands. There will be public comment period at the beginning and the end of this meeting, and public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Public comment may be provided in 4 different ways. The first, calling in to the number on the agenda. Second, emailing revinterim@lcb.state.nbus. Third, by mailing your written comments, and then we'll end up posting those written comments later in the minutes. And then by fax. If there are any links that or information that a presenter would like to share, make sure that those things are included in your slide deck. I think we have all of them. And so we will, if we have any technical difficulties, we'll get a chance to potentially pause and try to make sure your presentation is appropriately seen by the public and that everyone is viewed in the best light. So with that said, I want to open up for agenda item number 3 and open up for public comments. BPS, is there anyone on the line for public comment?
Sure, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. So we will move on from agenda item number 3, and we will move to agenda item number 4, which are the approval of the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes? If so, I will ask for a motion for approval.
I would move to approve.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator Dennis. Do you have a second?
Second.
Is that Assemblywoman Kasama?
It is.
All right, thank you. And so I will take a vote for a show of hands in favor of approving the minutes from March 23rd, 2022. Okay, thank you. Any opposed to approval of the minutes? Seeing none, the motion passes. We have approved the minutes for March 23rd. And now we will move into agenda item number 5.
Chair, I'm sorry.
What happened?
I'm sorry, Chair. Sorry. I thought I would have a chance for a comment. I just wanted to abstain since I wasn't present at the last hearing.
Oh, okay. So we will take the abstention. make sure, committee secretary, if you could document that we have one abstention from the vote or the minutes from Vice Chair Cohen. Okay, next we have agenda item number 5. I'm super excited about our presentation today. We were able to get the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco to talk about cryptocurrency. And then we also have a presentation from the Gaming Control Board and Commission, which I'm super excited about because I think, well, I know that there are some BDRs that I'm interested in, which is why we're having this conversation. And cryptocurrency is the new thing happening in the space around revenue. And so I wanted to have this presentation and super grateful that we could get the Federal Reserve Bank to come on and present. And so I will open it up to Miss Lee and Miss English. Or is there a third presenter with you guys?
Yes, presenters.
Repeat that?
Yeah, we just have 2 presenters.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So broadcast, we're ready. So we're ready for you to help them share screen. All right. Welcome to Senate Revenue.
Perfect. Let me share my screen. And while we are pulling up the slides, a little brief introduction of ourselves. So Erin and myself, we are senior fintech policy and risk advisors here at the San Francisco Fed. We belong to a team, probably the first subject matter expert team within the Federal Reserve System that is fully dedicated to fintech activities. Before I start the presentation, I need to give a standard disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation are our own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco or the Federal Reserve System. So a little bit about our team. So yeah. Okay, here we are. We are part of this Federal Reserve System, so we are central bankers. We also share the responsibilities as bank regulators together with the OCC, FDIC, and the state regulators. So at the San Francisco Fed, the fintech team is housed under the supervision and credit function, which means our coverage of fintech focuses on how fintech connects or influences supervised institutions. We spend most of our time doing research and analysis. We try to identify issues that are both important and relevant, where financial regulators may want to act upon in the future. And we also connect to banking and fintech community on emerging issues impacting the financial system. So located on the West Coast, we have the advantage of interacting with the local community where a lot of interesting and challenging fintech activities are happening. And that also allows us to dig a little deeper into emerging trends and add some forward-looking views to our analysis. So emerging fintech activities is one focus of our team. We have 2 broad areas, right? So for emerging fintech activities, that includes bank fintech partnership, where we try to be nimble and we will try to move quickly to capture the latest development in the fintech industry. So for emerging fintech activities, that coverage evolves over time. We review every year. Cryptocurrency, that is actually a longer term commitment of our team. So we anticipate that mainstream financial institutions' adoption of the digital assets will just increase over time. That trend is not transitional, even though we are seeing a lot of volatility in the marketplace and also, high level of policy and regulatory uncertainties that may change the business model. So that's why Erin and myself, we are, spending 100% of our time on crypto-related activities, just researching industry trends, make sure that we have good input into our Federal Reserve colleagues to support supervision, and also when provide input when we look into policy outcomes. So last but not least, our fintech team has a mission to advance general understanding of financial inclusion and financial health issues, which, as you know, is a core value proposition by many fintech firms. So how to conceptualize, these issues and how to assess those are, just research topics, but it's also something we spend a lot of time thinking about how to incorporate those sort of a culture and thinking into our day-to-day work. So I think today, Erin and I are going to lead this presentation, and Erin will give a brief overview of what we mean by crypto and some of the common issues these days related to cryptocurrencies. I was just looking at my Teams with the chat with Erin, and I know he's restarting his computer. I actually cannot see the video cams when I'm presenting. So Erin, have you logged back in? Oops. All right. So while we wait for him, let me pause here first and see if you already have some questions about our teams and our missions. Or fintech coverage in general. Then we anticipate this presentation to be about 15 minutes, and there should be time for questions towards the end.
Got it. Members, do you have any early questions while we wait for Erin to get on, since they were lost? Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Chair. Miss Lee, and I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. You had mentioned inclusion. What do you mean by inclusion? Is that by age? Is that by economic background? Is that even possibly by different ethnic diversity? So I'm trying to figure out with the inclusion statement what you mean by that.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thanks for this opportunity to talk a little bit about inclusion in general. And you're right, it is a topic that's very widely thrown out as a concept, but I'm glad that we are talking a little bit about what really entails. So in my mind, actually, inclusion is the first step when we think about the common opportunity for accessing financial services and economic opportunities. And many of the metrics you mentioned, those are different dimensions that we can use to capture, to measure like the overall picture and to identify, opportunities to improve. Then I also, one thing that I feel in my research is that inclusion is just a first step. It's a metrics, it's a number. Really matters is not staying on that entry level understanding about just the percentage of people we are accessing or who have access to basic bank account. Then what's really important is that when people have a bank account, do they use it in the reasonable? Do they use it in do they have the support to be able to tie their financial activities to improve their overall financial health? So it's going to be a combination of financial education, which is a part of the like a public mission of any regulators, but also ties into some of the consumer compliance functions. As bank regulators, we want to make sure that consumers are well supported and banks are doing their job to do.
It touched upon it. I'm not going to lie about this. I'm still very much in the dark, but thank you very much for that little bit of clarification. I'm sure during the rest of the presentation, there'll be a little bit more.
You are not alone. I think this is an evolving topic. I just feel I should emphasize that because that's one thing that sort of where we keep coming back to when we evaluate, technology advancement. So will we wait for Erin?
Oh, we have him. Mr. English is back.
Sorry about that. My internet went out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All right.
So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Erin, passing on to you. I'm just moving on to the next slides now. I mute myself.
Okay.
I
So-
apologize for interrupting, Chair. Ms. Lee, the presentation is no longer being shared, so if you can go ahead and share it again. We stopped the sharing while there was back and forth among members.
Okay. So generally, there are three types of crypto or digital currencies. Unbacked cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, stablecoins which seek to peg their asset value to a fiat currency such as the US dollar, and finally, central bank digital currencies or CBDC, which are digital currencies issued by a central bank. This first type of cryptocurrencies are digital money that do not require government backing, the involvement of an intermediary, and almost or can exclusively exchange value or transactions on a peer-to-peer basis exclusively. So while there are probably upwards of north of 15,000 different cryptocurrencies in the market today, the largest two by market capitalization are Bitcoin and Ethereum. So Bitcoin is the oldest, most valuable digital asset, still preeminent in payments and trading. Ethereum, whose native ETH token is the second most valuable, is the most popular platform for smart contract software development building on top of that network. And today, actually, Ethereum handles about more than 1 million transactions daily. Because of that peer-to-peer network in a fairly robust market, there is the price volatility of both Bitcoin and Ethereum can be pretty intense at sometimes, which leads to the intent and the creation several years ago of the second category, cryptocurrencies or stablecoins. So stablecoins are digital assets that are designed to maintain a stable value relative to a national currency or other reference assets. So today, stablecoins are primarily used in the United States to facilitate trading, lending, or borrowing of other digital assets, predominantly on or through digital asset trading platforms. The vast majority of stablecoin activity is associated with, I would probably call them centralized stablecoins, most notably the US dollar coin or USDC, and the Tether, which is actually the largest stablecoin by volume, the USDT. I say centralized because the issuers and operators of these stablecoins maintain reserves of a high quality liquid assets, usually, and the backing for the stablecoin, and they have fairly, depending on the issuer, fairly robust, usually governance protocols. And so both of these two types of cryptocurrencies in the last few years have actually motivated this third category, and that is the central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. Central banks globally are really interested in this. Just recently, the Bank of International Settlements released its annual survey of central banks on CBDC. And so this year, I think it was about 90% of the surveyed central banks are in some aspect of exploring it. Now, last year's figure was about 87%, but what changed in this year is that about half of that 90% aren't just exploring, they're actually in the development phase of a CBDC. And there are multiple motivations, but there is some attraction to the underlying technology or how some of the technologies of stable coins and Ethereum, Bitcoin operate. Not always, but they are. Another concern among different central banks across the world is that they are, depending on the market or the jurisdiction, feeling some competition for some of these cryptocurrencies. And so that is one of many motivations for why they are exploring this. Before moving into the next slide and sort of looking at some of the demographics, I just want to underscore is that a common thread among all of these risk is that they are software based. And so tried and true cybersecurity practices that, if you think about the chief information security officers for small businesses in your state, banks, casinos, all of those good cybersecurity practices that they operate for their network infrastructures should apply, in fact, must apply for if they were to think about using these types of different currencies. Same goes for licensed money service providers or money service businesses with respect to AML transactions. So, go on to the next slide. So as you can see, crypto usage is more or less even with some of these other fairly familiar products and services. However, there are kind of two unique qualities behind the numbers. So first is that the pace of growth over the years has continued to grow and grown significantly just in the past few years with respect to cryptocurrencies. Now, despite this growth, there is still a fair amount of uncertainty as far as how it operates, and just generally a fair amount of questions about it. So to help illustrate this point, there was another survey from April of this year by payments.com. And so they noticed that 56% of consumers who do not own a cryptocurrency feel they do not feel comfortable yet purchasing it. And 30% actually had questions about how to purchase it. 23% of respondents who do not own a currency say it is because they perceive it as either a bad investment or something we discussed in the previous slide, which is about the volatility of prices. Now, if you were to break down, we'll cover this in the next slide, but if you were to break down that 24%, you'll notice that a lot of the concerns where we're seeing a lot of the growth is actually in Gen Z and millennials, who essentially kind of grew up as digital natives, and they almost see these as a lot of those inhibitions that others might see. For them, it's fairly, as you'll notice in this slide, it's fairly popular among this particular demographic. I would notice that when we talk about, what are they buying, about 90% of them are buying Bitcoins, actually at about 87%. And then while this slide does show who is buying, or actually who actually has bought, the surveyors, they noticed that there was another category of individuals, which they called as the crypto curious. And so they define those as who do not currently own cryptocurrency, but indicate in either a wanting or a learn or planning to buy more soon. So this group is fairly significant in size. When the surveyors looked at it, it was about 63% of US adults. And so finally, while just 26% of crypto holders are women, surveyors did note that they see the potential for this use to change significantly. Women account for more than half of that 53% of those getting into or crypto soon, probably that crypto curious. And were that to happen, that could indicate a fairly significant shift. So next slide. So regardless of age, demographic, something that seems to be remaining the same is that most people who buy crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, see it as a long-term investment, and that kind of relates into the next category, which is active trading. So despite Bitcoin being used as a support of digital money, it's actually because of that volatility and as a store of value. This is probably why you see only a 12% actually use it for purchases. That said, there's a growing number of businesses within the United States and actually globally that will accept a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, for payment, but still, again, most users still see it as an investment. Before passing it off to Cindy, I just want to highlight an aspect of the privacy question. And so, interestingly enough, most users don't have that necessary expectation about when they are using these currencies that have privacy, and that sort of makes sense with you or two. And I don't mean to get too into the weeds a little bit, but cryptocurrencies operate on an immutable internet ledger, and where every transaction is captured, recorded just as you would in any sort of normal ledger. What isn't captured is necessarily error in English. I made a Bitcoin transaction from person to person, but there is a unique identifier that's associated. In computer technology, we would call that your cryptographic hash, and that will always be associated with you. And so, which makes inherently, privacy somewhat challenging with some of these technologies. And as you reflected here, interestingly, most users would probably agree with that. So with that, I'll pass it to Cindy.
Thank you, Aaron. I will pick up where Erin left and just want to talk a little bit about some of the driving factors that will affect banks' adoption of cryptos. As you can probably see if you follow this closely on the news media, there are increasingly we are seeing financial institutions started to dip their toes into crypto-related activities, right? So we think this is going to be a trend for here to stay. Then the crypto adoption, notwithstanding the recent market volatility, is just a matter of when, not a matter of if this will happen. One observation I have was just reading a Wall Street Journal article a couple of weeks ago. I wish I had a slide for that, which is money managers and hedge funds. They are really pushing their primary banks to offer them with the crypto services because they are actually uncomfortable with some of the crypto startups. They don't want to rely on them to get into trading cryptos for their clients. On the other hand, they also wanted to be able to offer, those services to their clients, and they do not want to lose out to their rivals who may be thinking about the same thing. So that's a new development. That's on the institutional side, but that coincides with some of the retail trends we have observed for the past couple of years, which is. When I first saw these numbers, I was like, this is interesting. But then there are a number of surveys that sort of tell the similar story, which is customers actually want to get their crypto activities from their primary banks, right? 71% of Bitcoin holders would want to switch their primary banks to a bank that offers Bitcoin-related products. So that's just one example that illustrates, the retail demand, basically customer demand, driving banks into considering some of these services, sometimes even reluctantly. And that's the trend, overall trend we are observing at this moment. And we anticipate that as long as this trend will continue, and as the previous slide Erin presented showed, to the extent that many of these crypto active users are planning to hold crypto for a long term, in hope of a price and value appreciation, that demand will be, I think, the biggest factor that will drive some of the banking sector adoption. So, which means regulators, then this should be very high on regulators' radar when we think about some of regulatory and supervisory issues. From the industry's perspective, it's probably, policy and the regulatory uncertainties might be the biggest headwind that they are facing at this moment. So I'm going to mention several, pieces of regulations currently underway, being considered and developed, just as an example of what are some of these, challenges for that may eventually become, impactful for crypto businesses business model. So right now there are, interagency work being done. Then we do not know when exactly, but sometime this year in 2022, we anticipate to see, interagency guidances related to custody, trading, lending of crypto, stable coins, holding crypto on balance sheets. So relates to permissibility, relates to risk assessment. But then having been at the Federal Reserve for a while, I know there are always twists and turns in this interagency process. But one thing is certain, which is evaluating crypto risk that is high on every banking regulatory agency's priority list. And also last year, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, which tackles, capital treatment for banks, various assets, they came up with a consultative document that is a preliminary plan for how to think about capital treatment for crypto assets. Basel Committee is still in the process of coming up with a second version of this document, which we will see sometime this year. And I imagine the risk and volatility of the crypto market will have some impact in how they think about, risk ratings, so on and so forth, important topics for banks. Last but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about crypto accounting. So at this moment, there's no specific accounting or disclosure rules on companies' crypto holdings. So currently, public companies account for crypto as the intangible assets with an indefinite life under GAAP. So companies basically can record unrealized losses, but not gains. Over time, there have been a push by some publicly listed companies to say, hey, can we switch to fair value accounting so that we can recognize some of the gains on our balance sheet? And the FASB is now considering setting rules, specific rules on companies' crypto accounting and disclosure rules, which may include fair value accounting as a consideration. Then for crypto custodians, SEC Stock Accounting Bulletin 121, a document that came out at the end of March, actually had pretty significant impacts on supervised institutions like publicly listed banks, as well as crypto firms that are providing crypto custody services. So what this accounting rule says is that an issuer that holds digital assets for others that does not control them will need to recognize a liability for this obligation to safeguard the digital assets and the corresponding asset. So this is not the case for traditional type of financial assets, but this will have implications for any crypto firms, publicly listed crypto firms, and publicly listed banks that are thinking about custody services because that factor into their cost of doing business and also potential capital treatment. So as the bank regulators and bank supervisors at this moment, we recognize, there are a lot of moving pieces in the policy and regulatory environment. Meanwhile, as the banks start to think about, crypto proposals, we really want to focus on how to evaluate safety and soundness of these proposals, as well as consumer protection implications. So some of the considerations we have, strategy, governance and controls, IT risk, cybersecurity, BSA, AML, third-party vendor management, consumer compliances. Those are some of the supervisory focuses at this moment as we think through these activities. So I think I will stop here, and we should have some time for Q&A. So if you have a question, we are happy to chat about it.
Okay, great. Members, questions? Vice Chair Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. So a few slides back, you had the slide about the 1 in 4 American households having crypto now, and you have the slides about who owns it. And but talk a little more about like how much we're seeing or people reporting. I know it's self-reporting, but how much? What are people owning? I mean, yeah. How much are we seeing? I know some people are jumping just all in and just buying a ton, and then are most people just really dipping their toes in and not getting much? What are the trends that we're seeing that we could expect for most of our constituents?
Sure. Yeah, Vice Chair, great question. Some of those stats didn't have that, so I'll just kind of comment what I've noticed anecdotally, and then Cindy can weigh in if she, anything that she's seen. It is. You see there's two categories of who's getting involved. There are retail investors that are, as you can probably imagine, as some of the stats imply, interested, you're correct in your notion about dipping your toes in a little bit to varying degrees. And then, there is kind of a growing interest within the investment community to some degree. I mean, I think, I think it's starting. I couldn't put a ratio on it, but it's Bitcoin has always been a retail-focused asset, but there is a growing interest within investor community, down the line.
Yeah, I think, Aaron, you are right. Aaron mentioned, I think you mentioned 90% are holding Bitcoin. So I think in terms of household wealth, we do not have that statistics. Anecdotally, I've seen all over the place. I've heard a mover that helped me move, young guy in his early 20s said he put all his savings, discretionary savings into Bitcoin, to which I was like, are you thinking about being the regulator? I started to talk about, financial health and everything. No, he wanted to send me a referral link to buy more digital assets. Then others start to think about this as a part of their portfolio, just as a diversifier. And also there is the engineer community. If you look at many of the crypto projects, DeFi projects, so some of the developers own a large portion of the coins. Tokens from the beginning of the project, so they hold those long term, and they do not necessarily trade, right? So it's another story for the retail investors that came to the game late and really catching the really nice pardon the cliche in my choice of wording, but the investor protection, I think, is more relevant for those retail investors that participated in this booming market in the past year or so.
Okay. So I know, and members, do you have any questions? I know I have a couple. Quick. Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to one of the first pages where it's the crypto versus stablecoin, is there, who makes that determination? And the reason I'm asking is I think there was one called Terra that was supposed to be tethered to the dollar, but then when the worth of the coin started going back, they separated themselves from it. So the way I read that is they considered themselves a stable coin, but then when it got rough, they became not a stable coin. So who makes that determination? And are there specific regulations as to how they meet those?
Assemblywoman, it's a great question. So the Terra stablecoin, and there are most of the stablecoins, I'll just by way of description, sort of most of the stablecoins which are in the market today are, as I mentioned, sort of collateralized. So if you take the example of the Center Consortium, so this is Circle and Coinbase came together to create the USDC coin. They have a separate account. So for as many, the concept is that for as many as USDCs are in circulation in a depository institution, they have that equivalent amount in very liquid assets, mostly cash, again, for some very highly liquid securities. Terra, which is it's an ecosystem which is comprised, which is the UST stablecoin, is something which another category which I didn't mention is called algorithmic. It doesn't have that collateralized back and forth. It's a little, I don't want to overcomplicate it, and we could spend too much time on it, but essentially what it was is that the peg was dependent upon another cryptocurrency called Luna. And so basically, it was stable insofar that everything worked in this category, as long as there was demand. When there was and there's still a lot we don't know because it's a fairly minor, what happened was fairly recent. When people wanted to leave that market, it frankly wasn't stable. And algorithmic stable coins they've been around for a while. Terra was the largest one. Frankly, it wasn't particularly stable. To your question about who makes that determination, what is a stable coin, what isn't, there is, as you probably know, that within Washington, D.C., there's a presidential working group which is actually working on this issue right now, the PWG. It's an interagency group. There is, and a lot of most of that focus, rightly, was focused on the collateralized version. I think but I think we will, policymakers will kind of make that determination, at a federal level, some of those classifications. But it's a very good question. Terra, which is domiciled outside the United States, I think again we'll find out more as more of over time about what happened and what went wrong. But it's a very good question, something we'll continue to monitor as well.
And I'll quickly chime in here. The nerdy part of me want to say there's also a lot of nuances that stablecoin is not like a generally accepted concept, right? So let's say if a firm issues what we call tokenized deposits, but do not call them stable coins, but it's backed by deposit. Is that stable coin? So it gets technical, and I think Aaron gave a great summary. Basically, if it's a cryptocurrency fully backed by a fiat reserve, financial assets, or even algorithm, they peg their values to the US dollar. They can do that to euro or Japanese yuan as well, but let's say they peg their value to fiat currency, then in general, that's a stable coin. Then all sorts of other cryptocurrencies, when we talk about that, this is just industry speak, we refer to cryptocurrencies that are not tied or pegged to fiat currency.
Ask a quick follow-up, Chair.
Go ahead.
So if someone is buying what they think is a stable coin from the entity itself, I'm assuming that there's sort of a website or some information that tells them whether or not it's pegged to something. But if some of these coins are being traded on a platform, is there any consumer protection or information requirements for that consumer to understand what they're buying, or is it sort of like a wild west of opportunity?
Cindy,
go ahead.
go first.
Okay, all right. I think you just really hit on something that's the center of who regulates stablecoin and how it should be regulated, right? So for every stablecoin, there are white papers, there are protocols. The conceptually is very open source. You can dig to the details of the protocol, the software, because they're essentially just software. On the other hand, we don't see, we don't have common standards for example, even for a fiat-backed currency. Let's say if a stablecoin claim is 100% backed by U.S. Treasury notes, then and if this stablecoin is incorporated outside United States, and mainly their main customers are international customers, they may not be they are in general not audited by a major auditing firm. So a lot of this voluntary disclosure, which I personally feel is a direction of the current regulatory debate or discussion at this moment.
Thank you.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you. And thank you again for the presentation. Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. One of them is about a very specific slide, and the other is in general. So I'm just going to ask first the specific slide, if you're okay with that. I believe it was Mr. English's slide on slide 6, when there was a discussion about crypto curious. Is that just people that are looking into it, or I just need that defined a little bit further if possible?
Yeah, so great, Assemblywoman, it's a great question. So crypto curious are those people who haven't defined by the surveyors who ran that survey. These are individuals who haven't yet bought a cryptocurrency, but are fairly educated, are in the process of learning a lot about it. And there's an expectation that they will buy soon.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies a little bit, because then I think in the same slide or the following slide, you had mentioned that there were some businesses that are starting to dip their toes, for lack of a better term. How do they report that on their profits reports, whether it is at the federal level or even the state level? How is that being reported, since at this time there are no regulations that are very clearly defined, it sounds like?
So let me try to answer that. This is not going to be a perfect answer because I'm not an accounting expert, but just knowing that, there's no crypto specific accounting rules in the US, and they're getting internationally the same thing, right? So let's say I mentioned, counting crypto as an intangible asset. That basically means if you hold it on your balance sheet, and it was 3,000 at cost, but now it's 30,000. You still cannot recognize those as gains, right? So that's why, I guess, at least as far as I can hear, that some of the driving forces for some publicly listed companies to say, hey, we're successful in holding crypto companies, or our companies should be bigger than they really look like. So can we change the accounting rule to accommodate that? Then the flip side of that, let's say if it's a supervised bank, then obviously fair accounting create a lot of issues in terms of what should go on balance sheet. Do they need to reserve capital, against those risky assets? Like what is the risk weighting? So I keep going back to bank supervision because that's what we do, but that's how it applies. Some of the practical issues. I feel I've read more about accounting rules than what I've read in competition for the past 5 years also.
Okay. Thank you. And I guess my last question, because it does clarify a little bit, but it's not still there. And it's going to, again, show my lack of knowledge about this. Listening to this information, it's very interesting, and I look forward to learning more. But I also am getting worried that there's going to be a junk bond type of thing where we've got vulnerable individuals who are older, who do have money, which although the data trends do not show this, who will then be preyed upon to attempt to invest in it. And the return of investment is not there. Again, I realize that the interagency guidance is coming, but just what are the safeguards to make sure that people are not taken advantage of in a pretty risky situation?
And I totally hear you, and thanks for sharing that observation and concern. And I feel bad to say that interagency guidance won't even cover that part. It's basically just about how banks can just meet the safety and soundness assessment of different crypto activities, and providing some guidance about how supervisors will evaluate safety and soundness of crypto related activities. The bank is a small part of this. Even though some banks are starting to look into crypto activities, they are not the major players in this field. There are crypto firms. Many of those have different licenses. Some of them regulated as trust companies, but majority are just technology companies. So that is a space that I anticipate. That's why I was like, when we think about how many crypto firms are in this space, and think about just we have like a huge crypto market with a huge volatility, captures pretty about 50% of our news feeds every morning. So this will be the top priority list of many regulators, SEC and CFPB included.
You have a follow-up?
This was a thank you, and thank you for giving me so much time.
Senator Dennis, I thought I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just kind of thinking about this from a state perspective. I mean, I could see a federal perspective also, but from a state perspective, what should we be concerned about as cryptocurrency becomes more and more used? I mean, is this something that's going to impact our revenue? Is there something, I mean, are there things that we need to be looking at and perhaps looking to change law or whatever to be able to accommodate what's going on in cryptocurrencies?
So what I can share is some of the observations of what other states have been doing. New York, for example, New York DFS, Department of Financial Services, have been regulating stablecoins and stablecoin issuers for a long time. Wyoming has a special purpose depository institution charter. So in those states, we are seeing some, I think, policy drives to say, let's normalize this regulation and let crypto companies operate in our states. Other states can have different initiatives. even New York State, for example, recently came up with like a different part of the state government came up with a monitoring on Bitcoin mining. So basically, considering the environmental impact, and so wanted to run in that activity. California State came up with an executive order, I think, just a couple of weeks ago, looking at digital assets related activities. I understand the focus will be on consumer protection. So those are some of the observations we have seen from state governments. But I think a lot of policy initiatives depending on priorities.
Yeah, and I'll just underscore my colleague's comments. So what I would say is forum like this, where there's a public comment period, there's a fair amount of new technology and new use cases and new activities, and whether it's bringing something up for public comment, bringing again sort of informational or testimonial sessions such as this are I can't stress the importance of those enough.
Thank you. And my concern is that we tend to sometimes we tend to be behind when it comes to new technologies, and then we're trying to catch up after the fact. I'm just wondering if there's a way, things that we should be looking at to help us to stay up with this, so that we're not, talking about after the fact, how do we fix this, but kind of try to keep up with it.
So if this sort of conversation helps, it's part of our job to be forward-looking in our job and to capture some of these trends. We have been monitoring, what's going on in fintech for more than 5 years, crypto in more than 3 years. So anything we can do to, just the knowledge sharing and information sharing. We are happy to hear more suggestions from you. And I'm also biased as a regulator. I think regulatory community will always be, more than one step lagging, the industry development, that is especially so for crypto and fintech community. So it's just like this innovations powered by technology, the pace we're seeing in business models by fintech firms, by banks, collaboration with them, is not the same pace anymore from what we used to see, the notification, notifying your supervisors, getting feedback, right? So right now, it's almost like some banks are thinking about launching new products in a very short period of time. So definitely a challenge for bank regulators as well. So Aaron knows this. We are upping our efforts to acquire talent and building knowledge and training our regulators to be up to speed in this field.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, so I have a couple. I need to fire these right off the bow. Okay. This, I don't know if the nerd in you allows me to do the crossover into tax land, but if you say no, it doesn't, I will keep my crossover question to myself, and then I will just continue to research in the space.
I'm so sorry. I really don't know anything about that.
Okay. So I'll keep it general. Because here are the concerns. And number one, why I wanted this presentation. I feel like a lot of the young people and the data that you presented, number one, shows that a lot of young people or millennials see this as their way to wealth. Probably the fast way to wealth, if they go into currency, cryptocurrency. But what I'm super confused about is, I know that it's determined off of a fair market value, but what I don't understand is how that fair market value is determined when we know the market is volatile, right? I know that there is a point in time in which we determine the receipt. But talk to me about how fair market value is calculated in a hourly to hourly volatile market.
So, Madam Chair, what I would say, I can say is, I mean, I'm not that well versed on it, but it is the fair market. It's a fairly fluid supply and demand market, and as far as what we would probably conventionally think of as, some entity providing that, I would have to say it's pretty much, acknowledged for, that volatility for what it is. And it's a source, there's an entire industry that kind of goes along trying to, developing programs, trying to make the most, trying to figure out when the price of Bitcoin goes up and down. But it's a source of constant attention. But when you're talking about a sort of a borderless open source infrastructure and trying to establish some of those, that level of insight, it can be difficult. So when you have a market that doesn't have a trading closing day, and the entities settle in about not at the end of the day, but in 10 minutes, and something that happens in Asia can affect the price in another area. It makes trying to, and again, I don't want to, I'm not an expert on Bitcoin pricing, but it does kind of lend to that volatility, and kind of makes that aspect difficult.
So let me.
If I could chime in
Okay.
here, and if you think about how market cap is calculated, it's actually, even for traditional financial assets, it's not 100% straightforward. Let's think about the case when one asset is listed on two different markets and there is an arbitrage opportunity between the two. Then let's think about a case where there's OTC market as well, right? So it's any market cap estimate, even in the traditional finance sense, is the estimate, which is why actually it's very important to cite our sources when we try to talk about market cap in general. Then in crypto's case, it's more complicated because exchanges are fragmented. So so first of all, there's no official statistics. There's no country borderline either, right? That's different from traditional financial market statistics. Then there are some statistics that come from, say, coin metrics, coin market cap, that industry basically collectively recognize as more reputable than some of the other sources. Then they verify some of the holdings at different exchanges and do a bottom-up sort of estimate. But still, that is something that probably just captures part of the market and not the entire market. Now, on the because it's software and sorry, Chair. Because it's software, it actually makes it easier to capture this on a 24/7 basis. So if to the extent they can verify technically, what's on the blockchain, they can attach a price tag to that. That is actually that part of being able to update in a more instant fashion. I think crypto is doing a better job than traditional financial assets. So sorry, that's a long.
No, it's fine. So I'm going to ask a theoretical question because I know that banks are trying to have this conversation about accepting cryptocurrency. Our financial division institution is just waiting for what the feds are going to do in this space. But just theoretically, let's say banks in our state start to accept this as income. What are the conversations that they're having around the conflicts of accepting this as income? Because there's no delivery location, there's no billing location. So there are banking rules, which you have to identify yourself more than the identifier number. And you actually, we have wire fraud, we have all of these things that say how you move money. But what what makes this super, super interesting is that I found out at the IRS sees cryptocurrency as property, and they treat it as if it is a property transaction. So, you know, if we're going old school with bartering goods, okay, that makes sense. But if it's property and not truly a foreign currency, or being treated as something equivalent to a foreign currency, but actually being seen as a property, how does that work? Like, I don't see it working, but maybe there are federal conversations in the land of fairy Bitcoin that I'm going to learn today.
Thanks for this question, which obviously this is going to be a question I do not have answers about, and I think I'm going to add to my list of all of the things I need to learn from the accounting community. But I think I have I may know some of the institutions you're talking about, and I trust that supervisory colleagues on the Federal Reserve side are in talk with the financial regulators at Nevada State. So the only thing I will say that it's very difficult to discuss this with a broad brush, because I personally haven't seen two crypto proposals that look exactly the same. So it matters, who's doing what. Is a subsidiary, is a holding company level, is a bank level. Like even let's say a bank wants to offer custodian services. Is it direct custodian services? Do they use a third party sub custody? What does a protocol look like? What does a contract look like? So that's where we feel, there's a lot to drill down. And I'll be humble and say, as supervisors, we are trying to learn from this process, because there's always something new for us to learn as we go through each case. So I know that's not a satisfying answer, but
no, it's fine. I mean, as you continue your journey, I'll be looking out for those white papers. I don't know if I should ask my final question because it was on NFTs. If I should just save that for a future white paper on how the Federal Reserve Bank does analysis on NFTs, the non-fungible tokens, and how they're working in this space.
I know that Aaron and I will add those to our slides if we have a next presentation. So.
Oh, so are you volunteering to come back?
Anytime, Chairwoman. And it sounds like you gave me a homework assignment too. So.
Okay, then. All right. So this is good. Members, if you have any final questions, if not, I'm gonna close it out and move to Gaming Control Board. Okay, Assemblywoman Considine.
I think that this has kind of already been talked around, but it was my understanding that Bitcoins, cryptocurrency, blockchains, all of that was created to take out the middleman, to work around the entire financial institution system. So if that's like the basis of this whole idea, do you foresee, as far as regulations going, there being like a bifurcation of stable cryptocurrency, or I guess is the best way to attach it, that's collateralized, as opposed to the type of cryptocurrency that wants to stay outside the entire system? Or do you see at some point all of this coming together and the Borg sort of swallowing all of cryptocurrency and just making it part of our regular financial system?
So Assemblywoman, I'll answer that first, and I'll pass it to Cindy. I think to your point, yes. So if you go back to, it was Halloween 2008 when Satoshi Nakamoto released his white paper. That was his intent. And within a very short period of, and that's what the technology can enable. However, the trend has been among consumers, and we showed it on that slide, that Cindy showed, where there's a preference for a consumer or a citizen's financial institution. That's where they feel, if they're not saying, I want to go to something called an unhosted wallet. If I'm going to get into this, I want to go to an entity that I trust. And I think that's, if I was to, sort of my opinion, where I see that trend happening, and that's sort of consistently happened ever since Satoshi released his white papers. That, yeah, there was a lot of peer-to-peer exchanges outside of formal financial structure as he intended, but it was the formal financial structure that ensured, licensed, regulated entities that provided those consumer protections. And I'll say, just to your Madam Chair, when you made the point about NFTs, today you have to, it's a fairly complex process, and it's where you have to use this thing called an unhosted wallet, and there's a lot of risks to an individual. And that's another, another aspect of this ecosystem that people want to get involved. They think there's some value in non-fungible tokens, but they want to have those protections, and they're very cognizant of it. And so I think, Assemblywoman, that's, there's always going to be, peer-to-peer exchanges and, operating outside of that. But I think the trend is that most people want to use it as a new technology, but within the regulated perimeter, and that seems to be the trend.
I'll chime in here. I want to be careful, but I have a view on this. I think the direction will be, we will meet somewhere in the middle. So as the crypto community, as Aaron mentioned, set out to be that alternative to traditional financial system. Once activities start to intersect with, say, institutional investors, there's no way to avoid interacting with the regulated financial system. And what we are seeing, even in some of the DeFi projects, even though their philosophy is say, cut the middleman, let's have a direct, peer-to-peer financing, but they also put into infrastructure that actually serve as sort of a middleman. Maybe it's not a bank, but that's another question, like should they be regulated? That's another question. But that's what I think Aaron previously mentioned, this concept of a centralized finance instead of a decentralized finance. And that is a model where, when crypto community, they want to get into, grow into scale, engage in traditional financial institutions as their customers, then they inevitably converge to that centralized structure.
Okay. So I want to thank you for your presentation today. It's left with a lot of question marks and how I view it, that it is volatile and we should be very careful with it. And I'm so grateful, Mr. English, that you didn't break into some, in 2008 in Halloween, once upon a time, I was like, I couldn't leave that alone without some type of joke. Because I was like, is this going to be a horrible Halloween story? But with that, I will close this out, and I thank you guys so much for coming, and we will transition to Gaming Control Board presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Russell Ginnan, and as we're transitioning to the next agenda item, this is Russell Ginnan with the Fiscal Analysis Division as your staff, just as a way of possibly explanation or apology for the members of the committee, as well as for Commissioner Kekeffer and Chairman Gibson and Mr. Barbie, that you just received their presentation material this morning, and it did make it in the packet that went out. And that was because we didn't realize it till this morning, but LCB's been having some Outlook email issues this week in terms of emails possibly going out or coming in and or being delayed. And so I just wanted to put on the record for that for the members of the committee, and again, for the presenters, that they actually, the email that we got Thursday morning was sent to us Tuesday morning. And so that's the reason why it wasn't in the packet and just getting it late. And so thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make that information part of the record as to what was going on in terms of being able to get this information to the committee members.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so we are now on agenda item 6.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. Thank you. For the record, my name is Ben Kiekeffer. I am very pleased to appear before you and your committee today as a member of the Nevada State Gaming Commission and to talk a little bit about cryptocurrency and gaming. I'm joined by Gaming Control Board Chairman Bryn Gibson and our IT Chief Jim Barbie, who are going to provide the vast majority of the detail and lend their expertise to this discussion. I wanted to start off with a little bit of history and policy perspective as it relates to this topic from a gaming perspective. In 2017, the legislature for the first time started weighing in on the blockchain, and it passed Senate Bill 391, which put a definition of a blockchain into our statutes, recognized transactions that occurred over a blockchain in our Electronic Records Act, and really put down a marker as a state that was going to recognize this technology on a go-forward basis. Fast forward a couple of years to 2019, and virtual currencies made their way into Nevada statutes in a couple of different places. The first was Senate Bill 164, which added virtual currencies to the list of intangible personal property, and it was put in as another item in the list that was exempt from taxation in our state. It's, bonds, stocks, notes, other things like that. Virtual currency was added to that list. It was also incorporated through Senate Bill 44 as property for the purposes of the state's Unclaimed Property Act. So virtual currency could then be incorporated into the Treasurer's Office Unclaimed Properties. Fast forward again to 2021, and there was another minor touch on virtual currencies in Senate Bill 71, which related to game-related digital content as something that was exempt under the virtual currency definition for the Unclaimed Property Act. And in Senate Bill 165, we created the Esports Technical Advisory Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Gaming Control Board, which is looking at wagering on esports as a public policy for the state. They've held their first meeting, and virtual currencies are sure to come up in that discussion. From my new position as a regulator and in the gaming space, I'm a believer that it's our responsibility to continuously adopt the needs of our customers in a responsible way and adapt our processes to reflect the demand that they're putting in front of us. And I think it's inevitable that cryptocurrencies will be a currency by which people want to make wagers. And I think that we need to be prepared for what that looks like from a regulatory perspective, as well as a taxation perspective, which is probably most relevant to this committee, and to ensure that the state continues to receive the tax revenue it deserves and needs as a part of any wagers made using cryptocurrency. So, Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I'd like to turn it over to Bryn Gibson to provide his presentation and give you a little bit more detail.
Okay, go ahead. Welcome, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Bryn Gibson, Chairman of the Gaming Control Board. This is Jim Barbie, our Chief of the Technology Division. We've been invited to hear, we have a PowerPoint presentation that I think that you, Chief, are going to put up. Okay. Some of this is duplicative, and I apologize for that with the last presentation. There are common elements to cryptocurrency is cryptocurrency. In the gaming space, there's some unique aspects of it, but there will be some crossover. Let's see here. All right. So we'll start with some fundamentals, and I apologize if these are things that are obvious to you. Blockchain is the underlying technology beneath cryptocurrencies, and blockchain is a public distributed ledger recording methodology for transactions. And a transaction can include anything of value. So a deed could be transferred or transacted upon. A car title could. Software can. Most often, blockchain transactions are used to record transactions involving virtual currency or cryptocurrency, as you call blockchain technology keeps an automatically generated encrypted record or ledger of all transactions in which it is employed. This is a graphic of the way the ledgers work. So there are various nodes that are associated with a cryptocurrency and ledgers associated with those nodes. So on each one of these ledgers, each block as part of the blockchain for a transaction would record certain elements of the transaction. And this is one of the things that makes it makes cryptocurrency relatively difficult to manipulate. So for example, with Bitcoin, there are 15,000 different nodes, and with each node, there's an associated ledger. And so in order to manipulate Bitcoin, for example, you'd have to go in and with 51% or 40 or 50 point, whatever, just slightly over 50%, you'd have to change the ledger. And that's a giant number and it'd be very difficult to manipulate. You'd have to have huge collusion, which makes it almost impossible for a deep market cryptocurrency. The term block in the blockchain, this is where the transaction has some security. So each transaction records on the distributed ledger, it serves as a metaphorical block, and it's added to the existing chain of similar transactional blocks. And that's where the term blockchain comes from. And so it's effectively a ledger or chain of custody is what it serves as. An ideal blockchain record is encrypted. It contains redundancies. That is, there are ledgers associated with each node, and there are many, many nodes associated with each currency. And this ensures that the record is not tampered with or falsified or altered unnecessarily or unjustifiably. The unbroken record adheres to strict chain of custody rules and is shared or distributed among every member of the blockchain. And these blockchains are compared automatically for discrepancies. Each new transaction is added to the record, is timestamped and verified by all those using the blockchain to ensure validity. This is an example of a block. And so if we had a transaction block on a ledger, with Bitcoin, for example, you'd have 15,000 different nodes with each transaction as part of a ledger. And it contained a header, a hash function, and then a date to be timestamped. So digital currencies are one of the applications of blockchain technologies. There are many of these. I think there are roughly 1,583 according to a market cap website that I look at relatively frequently. And they vary widely in their legitimacy. Some are very legitimate, Bitcoin, for example, and some are extraordinarily illegitimate, depending on the depth of the market, how widely they're traded, how well they're known, what the underlying system looks like, and so on. Cryptocurrencies, they're not issued by a bank at this point, and they're protected by government rules in the same way that fiat currency is. And they're not issued by a central bank, as you just heard from the San Francisco Fed. And this is where the term decentralization comes from. So it's a decentralized type of currency. The intersection of a digital currency and gambling was inevitable, I think. Cryptocurrencies do provide certain transactional benefits. And we're going to talk about the risks in just a moment, but I also want to acknowledge some of the benefits. First of all, the transactional fees associated with cryptocurrency transactions can be much lower than a wire fee, for example, or going through account creation, just everything associated with traditional banking transactions, including getting an actual account at a bank, can be a high cost for some people. And so cryptocurrencies do present lower transactional costs generally. The payment confirmation occurs immediately. The transactions are irreversible, which lowers certain fraud risks relative to traditional currencies, so they can't be undone. And certain indicators of ownership are recorded in each distributed ledger block. And there are many who argue that this personal identification associated with someone behind the ledger hashtag makes the know your customer types of issues that we deal with in the gaming space less important to the transaction. The lower cryptocurrency transactional fees may allow for greater casino bonusing, advocates would argue. So the lower, the margins in some types of gaming, sports wagering, for example, are extraordinarily low or small. And so the greater, the lower the additional fees or transactional costs of a certain kind of wagering, the greater the potential bonusing there is. Fund transfer, it occurs outside of traditional banking systems. They're simple, advocates would argue, and individual identities are not generally tied to a transaction, creating greater potential for a type of anonymity. And this is referred to generally as pseudonymity or pseudonymity. The electronic nature of cryptocurrencies may appeal to a different demographic group. This is an important point, this last point. The San Francisco Fed mentioned, and they had a data graphic speaking to the group that is most interested in cryptocurrencies. And as Nevada attempts to widen its gaming market, allowing cryptocurrencies to be used either on the floor prior to the wager itself or actually in wagering is one of the things that we hear most from the industry that might appeal to younger and different types of demographic groups. There are risks, and we've heard a number of those risks mentioned already associated with cryptocurrencies. In the gaming market, they're especially unique. So gambling establishments, casinos that have gross gaming revenues above a certain amount are subject to Title 31 or the Bank Secrecy Act. And this is a list of the risks, and we'll just quickly go through each one, but just for your sort of your preview, so you have this in mind, there are market risks, shallow market problems, counterparty risks, transactional operational risks, privacy-related risks. There are legal and regulatory risks, AML challenges, including the use of currency mixers, and there are some transactions that allow for multiple wallets to be used at the same time, which makes it difficult to trace back to an individual any particular transaction. So the market risks. We heard from the San Francisco Fed that there's great volatility in crypto markets, and this is the case. This is a graphic that shows trading volume and trading activity associated with crypto markets. And depending on the type of cryptocurrency we're talking about, the volatility can be considerable. Over the last few weeks, we've seen some of that. The shallow market problem is one that is substantial. What this is if you have a cryptocurrency that is not widely traded, meaning that it's relatively new and there are only a small number of those who hold the currency or own it, it can be manipulated very easily by trading large blocks of it. So this is certainly a problem. And one of the reasons why those businesses that do engage in cryptocurrencies or accept them as a representative value, they'll only accept a certain type or certain named cryptocurrencies. There are counterparty risks. These vary in type, but one of the problems with cryptocurrencies and counterparty risk is that if the underlying cryptocurrency exchange is illegitimate, or if it's seized by the federal government or by a state agency, the people who are using the exchange may lose their funds. And there is no FDIC insurance, for example. The $250,000 amount that we know exists for insured banks and credit unions does not exist for cryptocurrency exchanges. Another type of counterparty risk is just fraud. You've got, as you can see here, different types of scams, and they're many in number. And they differ in source. You've got DDoS attacks. You've got mining scams here. Another problem that you see is that transaction permanency and can be a problem, because when you have 15,000 different nodes and ledgers associated with each one of the nodes, if there's an errant transaction, it's not reversible. So it's not easy to fix a problem with a transaction. It's not like taking back a shirt or a dress to a store. It's a much more permanent transaction if it occurs with cryptocurrency. There are operational risks, and I mentioned one of these in particular, but the operational risks are obvious, and they deal with infrastructure and security assumptions. Here, for example, we have, we see the different types of transactions, and we see that there are large numbers of gambling transactions, currency exchange transactions that may be subject to DDoS attacks, operator error, and vulnerabilities in the underlying software itself, which might allow for backdoor hacking and other types of problems. Anonymity in the cryptocurrency space is something that's it's an interesting issue. Assemblywoman Considine mentioned that cryptocurrencies were established in the beginning to sort of circumvent or go around the traditional financial markets. And one of the reasons, one of the elements of that was anonymity. I recently had a discussion with a leader of a gaming leader of a foreign nation, and he asked me about cryptocurrency use in gambling, and I said, well, cryptocurrency is something that's a hot topic. It's something at the front of our minds, but we do have to know your customer is something that adheres in the gaming space. You have to follow it for Title 31 purposes. And the response back to me was, isn't anonymity essential to cryptocurrency? And that is a problem. So Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency has an address, a hashtag address, that's a public key hash. The individual's name, that is personal identification, is not inherent in that public key hash. And this type of anonymity is specific to cryptocurrencies. True anonymity, if we're going to talk about anonymity, would require both that you have a hashtag associated with someone and that it's unlinkable to an individual person. And for anonymity, different interactions of the same individual using different public key hashes should be difficult to link to the individual. Now, it's not all that difficult to create multiple identities with a cryptocurrency. So you can generate these key hashes. The same person could create multiple key hashes, and it could be very, very difficult to trace back to the individual these multiple transactions that occur through these different key hashes. There are legal and regulatory risks that we deal with. I mentioned this already, but if an exchange is seized or forced to stop operating due to illicit activity or due to being named on a foreign national list that, say, FinCEN puts out, it could cause for anyone who's involved in that exchange to lose their investment. In addition, untraceable digital currencies, they tend to be used, or they're often used to facilitate illicit activity, such as tax evasion and sale of illegal items. There's a website by the name of Silk Road that some of you may heard of, and that was one of the biggest examples of illicit activity and illicit goods that were for sale using cryptocurrencies. One of the major anti-money laundering challenges that we face in the context of cryptocurrencies is the use of mixers. And I'll show you a graphic of a mixer on the next page, but mixers are an attempt to obfuscate the identity of the individual behind the identity hash. And so what they do is they pull these identity hashes, and they then transact in a way that's very difficult to trace back to an individual person, any particular transaction. There was recently an action by FinCEN and by the Department of Treasury against a group by the name of the Lazarus Group. It was actually 3 or 4 different companies out of North Korea. and they created backdoors into cryptocurrency and hacked roughly $620 million worth of value. There are nation states that FinCEN has formally deemed potentially threatening to national security, and a number of these states or countries do have extensive cryptocurrency networks. They have vast mining networks, cryptocurrency mining networks. Iran, Russia, and Venezuela are examples. These regimes have publicly declared their intention to use or develop digital cryptocurrencies or currencies for illicit activity. And they include attempts to evade sanctions, such as those imposed on Russia due to its invasion of eastern Ukraine. There's also the problem of multi-wallet transactions, and I mentioned this just a moment ago, that one individual can generate multiple identity hashes, and they can be in multiple wallets. And these different wallets or these different identity hashes can be used in a single transaction. And I'll show you a slide next that shows how this is done. This is an example of clustering of identity addresses or identity hashtags associated with a cryptocurrency. And what you can see is the pooling of these addresses and the way that it might be incredibly difficult, depending on the attempt to obfuscate and how many different addresses there are, to trace the transaction back to an individual. This is an example of a multi-address purchase or pooling. And so in this case, you'd have a person who's buying from a large box store, say a tea kettle. And you could have identity addresses associated with one person, but there could be three different identity addresses all pooled and funded to number 8 there, and that allows the purchase of the kettle. In March of 2022, President Biden, he published an executive order that is a very important document, I think, for all of us to understand and to be aware of. And the name of it is Ensuring Responsible Development of Digital Assets. Excuse me. It's the first whole government approach to addressing risks and harnessing the potential of digital assets and distributed ledger technology. There are 6 key priorities that President Biden laid out in this document. Consumer and investor protection is first and foremost. And I think that question was asked, or there was someone who made a comment to that effect. Financial stability is another one. Preventing illicit financing is another key element. U.S. leadership in global financing systems is very important. And the government does play an important role as a regulator. Financial inclusion is another goal of digital assets, and responsible innovation. That's really the mantra. If you were to take one out and put it above all the rest of them, it would be responsible innovation. And that's something that FinCEN talks about regularly. The Deputy Director of Enforcement and Compliance for FinCEN. And as an aside, if you're not familiar with FinCEN, FinCEN is an umbrella organization housed at the Department of Treasury, and it is the central repository for financial transactions that have any dealings with the United States. So it's CIA, NSA, FBI, state regulatory agencies. FinCEN has access to all of these transactions and has vast computing power and the ability to use algorithms to find anomalies and to link the transactions back to individuals and groups. And the goal, of course, is to stop or to prevent illicit financing and laundering of money to activities that are illegal. So national security, prevention of illicit financing, consumer protection, and financial stability, these must occur while also modernizing the U.S. and global payment system. And this is what President Biden was what he really is laying out. The fundamental principle, as I noted, was responsible financial innovation. And financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act and under the regulation of FinCEN include casinos. So we're obligated to ensure that any new currency offerings are executed in coordination with controls commensurate with the risk of the new payment offering. New financial products, according to President Biden and according to FinCEN, they have to be built with compliance in mind. So it can't be the case, according to President Biden, FinCEN, that a virtual asset service provider builds a new cryptocurrency and then goes back and attempts to create compliance or build compliance into the asset after it's already out there on the market. That's a backwards approach in the mind of President Biden, and I think he's right. FinCEN guidance in the context of casino operations, it's fairly simple and very clear. AML and cash transaction reporting requirements apply to financial institutions, including gaming licensees dealing with cryptocurrencies and all other digital assets the same way they do to financial institutions dealing in fiat currency. So cash transaction reports, suspicious activity reporting, all of the documents that are now filed with IRS and with FinCEN still have to be filed even if we allow for cryptocurrencies to be used in gambling. And that's all I have formally, but Chief Barbie, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. This is Jim Barbie. For the record, I'm the Chief of the Board's Technology Division. In addition to what was presented by the previous group and what Chair Gibson has talked about today, the casino industry has some unique challenges when it comes to making use of cryptocurrency in particular. So outside of the BSA requirements, there are things that our operators would have to take into account that primarily are a result of the fluctuating value of cryptocurrencies. Perhaps the top three would be, number one, they have to calculate their taxes and report their taxes in dollars and cents. And with the value of cryptocurrency changing, hourly, there would need to be a scheme in place for them to, at any particular time, be able to evaluate what their tax burden is. Additionally, we've talked about patron protection. If a casino were holding cryptocurrency on behalf of a patron, there would need to be some type of reserve requirement that they would need to have. And again, because of that fluctuating value of the cryptocurrency, there might be some challenges in determining that reserve requirement. But one of the most interesting aspects, I think, of the potential use of cryptocurrency for gaming operators would be using it to conduct actual wagering activity. In particular, conducting future wagering activity, and that would be in the realm of sports wagering. So take the scenario where your patron places a wager on a future event, you make a wager on next year's Super Bowl, and you place that wager using cryptocurrency at today's value. You could find yourself, again, based on that fluctuating value of the cryptocurrency, that you could actually win the wager and be paid in cryptocurrency, but if the value of the cryptocurrency has deflated, you could potentially lose money on that endeavor. So that it's a unique facet to the gaming space, I think, when it comes to making use of cryptocurrency. Although it's not specific to cryptocurrency, I think there was some talk about NFTs and digital assets in general, and that's something that we've seen a small amount of interest in from operators now on how the board and commission would handle digital assets, like an NFT, for example. And a couple of potential applications of NFTs in the gaming space. The first would be along the lines of an award. Consider a slot machine that when you line up a certain combination of symbols, instead of getting paid in dollars and cents, perhaps it was an NFT. And for those of you not familiar, an NFT or a non-fungible token, it's really a unique digital asset. Primarily, they're used now in media or used to represent media, visual and audio images. But let's assume that a licensee was advertising, you hit the progressive, and instead of winning dollars and cents, you're winning an NFT. How would that licensee treat that NFT for tax reporting purposes? That one, for us, we would most likely look at that as they would any other asset, and require that they would have to report on that asset for whatever its cost was. For example, let's say you won a progressive and it was to win a car. The licensee is able to deduct the actual cost of the car, not the market value of the car, but the actual cost. We could potentially apply that same approach to NFTs when they're used for payouts. But I think one of the most interesting uses where we might see NFTs coming into the gaming space is when an NFT represents a game element. And although we're talking a lot about cryptocurrency, I really think this is where we're going to see the use of blockchain intersect with the gaming space. Is consider an NFT, this non-fungible token, as a game element. Think of a horse, for example, in a horse racing game, where this horse has unique aspects to it, unique characteristics. If it's good in a straightaway, if it has burst speed, if it comes on heavy, if it pulls in late, those type of aspects. Those can all be coded into an NFT, and someone can actually own that horse and enter that horse in a virtual horse race against horses that have varying attributes to them. And then as the race progresses, there are RNGs called that compare those different attributes to determine who's ultimately going to win that event. I'm using the example of a horse race. That's the most straightforward, but you could really conduct that type of gaming activity using your imagination is the limit of what you could include that. It could be, I'm saying horse races, it could be spaceship races. You could have sporting events that are conducted where, the players are NFTs among themselves. You could create your own virtual entity. Let's say it was a D&D character, and run your D&D characters through some type of campaign. But it all comes back to those game elements are based on NFTs, and ultimately they're competing against one another based on their assets, where the outcome is determined by an RNG. But it's an exciting space. There's a lot of talk, for sure, about the use of cryptocurrency and blockchain in general. What I've seen so far is more of a casual interest, I think, from the industry right now. And I think one of the reasons it exists is because of the overhead that would come with, as I was speaking earlier about, the accounting that would come into play to determine what your tax liability is, as well as potentially what your reserve requirements, such that the work that's necessary and the resource outlay there might outweigh, if you do your cost benefit analysis, the actual use of cryptocurrency. Aside from perhaps getting a good soundbite that you're making use of cryptocurrency.
I would just note that there are cryptocurrency-based casinos now. They tend to be internet-based casinos. They're not licensed or regulated. I think there's one that is licensed, not in this country. And one of the reasons why cryptocurrencies are so attractive for that kind of gambling is that it's difficult to trace the activity back to any individual.
Okay. So thank you for that presentation. That was super informative. Members, questions? Okay, Assemblywoman, I'll do Senator Tatro and then Assemblywoman Considine. No, you don't have a question? Okay, all right, Assemblywoman Considine.
So initially, when Mr. Keykefer talked, he talked about bills that were passed, making cryptocurrencies property, and then also exempting them from taxation. So having this conversation, does that mean if this conversation or these ideas move forward, there needs to be changes in the NRS making virtual currencies and not property, and changing that taxability situation?
Thank you. I appreciate the question, Assemblywoman Considine. Ben Keykefer for the record. I pointed out that our statutes really do reflect virtual currencies as intangible personal property as they currently stand. I don't think that necessarily prohibits the gaming control board and the gaming commission to promulgate and adopt regulations that that would allow for the use of cryptocurrency and wagering. I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. However, I think that you bring up an interesting point that it may be time to look at whether changes to definitions of cryptocurrency need to be made in statute to reflect their use as an actual currency rather than as a property.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? So I have a couple. I'm super glad you guys put up the risk slide. Awesome. So a couple of things ran through my mind. So I'm going to do the simple ones first. If you were to accept crypto, and I understand that there's a casual interest right now, how would you deal with crypto for tips?
Crypto for tips. Right. We know there are challenges with tip pooling and those issues right now. I don't know. I mean, crypto and tips.
My initial thought on crypto and tips is we don't weigh into that space as it stands right now. Whether or not a person makes a tip using currency, if they were to make a tip using show tickets or jewelry, that's somewhat outside of our purview as it stands right now. That's my understanding.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think that's right.
And Madam Chair, Ben Keycover for the record, I'd also weigh in that different properties could look at adoption of cryptocurrency very differently. If a property were to decide to actually hold crypto and accept wagers in it, that would be one thing. There could also be an intermediary that does more of an instantaneous conversion of crypto into a fiat and into US dollars. So I think how a property or a technology service provider ultimately facilitates those transactions could dictate how things like tipping and taxation are dealt with.
So, okay. So, I had another question because what I was reading in the IRS, and this has a lot to do with payments, how payments are made within the system. And so one of the things that I read on the IRS was that if payments are made using virtual currency, they're subject to backup withholding to the same extent as other payments that are made in property. And so when we think about that in the context of I'm issuing a payment, the gaming company then has to do that withholding for that currency. I mean, I think it creates some additional accounting measures.
The value of the currency is another major issue. They'd have to somehow exchange it into fiat currency almost immediately, and then deal with the accounting issues then.
Yes, this is Jim Barbie for the record. We do have cryptocurrency on the gaming floor today. However, it goes through some type of exchange service before it actually enters into the gaming space. For example, if a patron wanted to make a withdrawal from their cryptocurrency wallets to place a wager, they could go up to a cryptocurrency ATM, make that withdrawal, get fiat currency, and then take it into and game with that if they chose to.
Okay. And so I have another question that's a little bit more involved with, I guess, gaming revenue that's received. So, and I'm curious about this question. I don't know the answer. It's just something I've been reading. But one thing I learned was that there are short-term capital gains and losses associated with revenue from crypto as well. So let's say a gaming property accepts revenue, and there could be, because now it's on your sheets. How have you guys internally discussed this? Because if the crypto is up, you're getting a gain because at fair market value, actually, let's say fair market value at the time was 40,000, but it jumped to 50,000. There's a gain, and it's still attributed to the entity because it is revenue that is being received and then has to be reported, et cetera, et cetera.
Take your assumptions as fact, which, and I've known you long enough to, I'll do that with confidence. You're talking about capital gains and losses that have to be accounted for by the entity itself, and then ultimately recorded. We'd have to audit those. It'd be a complex auditing process, is what I would say. We have about 80 auditors here inside of the Gaming Control Board, and it's one of the reasons that we have a 99% plus tax collection rate. That would make it much more difficult. I assume that there'll be software fixes going forward that will make it easier, but right now, if it's just eyes on paper, it'd be very complex.
We have also taken into I don't have a solid answer for you on how it would be handled, Madam Chair. However, internal discussions with our chief of audit on how we would handle cryptocurrency that's used for wagering, the question comes up, if it loses value, is that a loss, a gaming loss? This would be outside of operating revenue, but would it be a gaming loss or a win should that value fluctuate? And I think that's something that we would want to protect against, that if there was a loss due to the significant fluctuation in value, does the state take a hit in gaming tax paid on that? So although I don't have an answer for you, that is something that's on our radar.
Okay, good, because I know that some of the early IRS notices have kind of answered that question on the capital gains and loss piece, but I just think internally, I'm glad it's on your radar, because I think that if you guys make this decision in the future, there's some extra effort. Also, I wanted to ask a question about, it was the third-party network transactions. There's a particular rule within the IRS on how they treat the third-party network transactions, and I think you guys touched on that a little bit, but I guess I wanted a little bit more understanding on, because there is some reporting that goes into that. What have you guys internally looked at or discussed around a third-party network transaction that is receiving payment from you, but the thing that was a part of the payment was the crypto?
So what about the money transmitter licensee that is taking the kiosk operator, for example? That's the question. How is that treated?
We do have an entity that's regulated. It's called a cash access and wagering instrument service provider. And admittedly, we haven't directly explored how the scenario that you're describing would be handled. But there is a similar structure for regulating those who provide cash access and wagering instruments, kiosk providers. They come under our purview via a licensing process. And however, we don't get into with them how or have standards on the various fees and whatnot. That one is a market factor that we haven't delved into attempting to regulate.
Okay. And then my last question, and this is one where I'm just super curious, because I'm just so interested in how the transactional piece of this works. So I'm going back to NFT. So let's say, because an NFT can be anything, we know this, but on the IRS side, income, my understanding is that income from an NFT is treated as inventory. And so let's say you end up collecting an NFT because it's a part of a transaction. Are you now internally, the conversations that you're having, you're now in possession of what the IRS considers inventory? So then how are you going to treat it? How are you going to talk about it? How are you going to do exclusions and inclusions?
I don't have an answer, Madam Chair, but I'm taking notes.
Can we get back to you with a response? I mean, it sounds like, I mean, so you're saying it's inventory. It wouldn't fit traditional inventory sort of standards inside of a casino. It sounds like intellectual property almost, or intangible property. So we'll have to look at that, Madam Chair, and get back to you with a response. Unless Mr. Gendon has an answer.
But what I can do is share the internal revenue notice that I was reading, and I also learned some additional things in my national meetings that I go to on tax, and it's just been interesting because although it's intangible, we know that there are various categories of intangible, right? If something is inventory, if it's property, you have to treat it as such, right? I mean, and it becomes a different thing, right? If this was 1932 and I brought in a horse and said, "Hey, I want to wager. I want to give you my horse." I mean, it's an entirely different conversation that we're having. That we're talking about this digital asset that is taking various forms, and we have to treat it the way that the law has already established it. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
Yeah.
You heard, Madam Chair. You heard from the representative of the San Francisco Fed that each proposal that deals with whether NFTs or just cryptocurrencies generally is different. We've said to the industry, please bring your proposals to us. We will vet them. And if there's something that looks like it's viable and that we can regulate adequately, ensuring that we collect the tax we need to, and there's no laundering issues or illicit activity, we'll move in that direction. That's really where we're at right now. Our posture is not one of rejection. It's also not one of trying to get in front of something that is so complex and has so many variants that we can't possibly understand them all. We are in a posture of accepting whatever the industry wants to bring to us and vetting it. And so far, Madam Chair, we haven't seen much that's solid.
Okay. I mean, I know Senator Keffer probably will frown on this next comment. However, I appreciate the pause and the reflectiveness that you guys are engaging in. I mean, my personal sentiment is don't go any deeper than what you've already gone, but I know that I probably will not get my wish. I just think there's work to do in the policy space around tax. And I definitely want to stay involved in these conversations because I think it's risky business.
Madam Chair, Ben Keffer for the record. And what I've been impressed by in my time since the fall with gaming control is the approach that they do take to regulating industry and ensuring that they're working with the industry to move in a direction that is reasonable and necessary, right? There's no point in us spinning our wheels to create an entire regulatory structure that isn't going to work, right? Or that the industry is not going to use. So as Chair Gibson said, we're in the posture of accepting changes that the industry wants to propose to us, and then considering them and working them through our traps. And I think that that's a good place for us to be right now, as cryptocurrency itself continues to evolve, and as the gaming industry tries to figure out the right fit for it.
Okay, good to know. I don't know if any members have any final questions. I was going to close it out. Okay, Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you. I have a question. Is there any property now in the state that is pushing for the ability to accept cryptocurrency directly? Because it seems to me if we have third-party vendors that are providing exchanges for it, just leave it that way. Just allow the third-party vendors to do it. We don't need to get involved with that. seems like what's going on now, and that seems like the smart thing to continue with. But just curious, is there any property that says, we want the ability to accept this directly?
Madam Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Kasama, Chief Barbie, you deal with the industry, with the manufacturing side quite a bit. I mean, they seem the money service providers or the kiosk providers seem to be the most vocal in this space. That's my experience. I know that Sirk and Mr. Stevens have talked about cryptocurrencies, and that's where the kiosks exist, I believe. But I have not been approached by any licensee to the members of this body pushing hard for the use of cryptocurrency in actual gambling transactions. That's what I can say.
Good afternoon, Assemblywoman. Yes, I have had conversations with operators and manufacturers about the potential use of cryptocurrency. And as Chair Gibson had pointed out, our response to them has been open-minded with, give us how or what you want to do and how it would satisfy some of these fundamental requirements that we've discussed today. And then we can, come at that from a better position of knowledge on how we might regulate that. I would go back to my comment about it's only been a casual interest. I haven't had a lot of those conversations, but we are having those conversations. For some manufacturers, for example, they want to explore this as an opportunity. It's a hype right now. It's something they don't want to be on the backside of should it take off. So they might be looking into that. And then from an operator standpoint, yes, it's been brought up about how can we potentially make use of cryptocurrency, whether it's a cryptocurrency that we've discussed or potentially a cryptocurrency that they create themselves. So yes, we're having that conversation, but it's not been pressing.
Madam Chair, if I can just say this, I thought that one answer to the cryptocurrency volatility issue might be tethering the currencies to the fiat dollar, for example. And I'm disappointed to hear from San Francisco Fed that that has not been a solution. That was something that we talked about internally here. And even the algorithmic approach where you have multiple cryptocurrencies, you weigh them, for example, or other pieces of a sort of a weighted equation, that doesn't seem to be the answer. So we're still searching for a way to ensure that we don't lose tax dollars if we were to allow cryptocurrencies to be used in actual gambling transactions.
Yeah, and I think that there's a broader sense out there that there is a fear in legitimizing the alternative currency. And if you were to tie it, then it further establishes it as a legitimate currency. And I understand it's out there, but I think that that's some underlying subtones that are going on. There's the fear that it could break the traditional market.
Madam Chair, Ben Keycover for the record. I'd point out that, and I may have missed it earlier in the presentation, but just today, the Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve, spoke with, testified before the U.S. House about the prospect of creating a central bank digital currency, which is not a cryptocurrency, right? It's basically like a digital dollar. But, that may be the type of step if the central bank were to create something along those lines that would initiate the sort of technology pieces within the gaming industry that would then be able to be used for cryptocurrency as well. I guess that would be to be determined.
Okay, I hope not. I'm probably going to be this outlier saying no, not Nevada, but I'm just gonna leave it right there. I'm not a fan. Okay, if you're picking up anything, I'm not a fan of this. But okay, I appreciate you guys presenting. I think it was really good information and it was timely. I am looking at some BDRs in this space. I am more on the side of I want to protect Nevada consumers. I want to protect them from fraud and various things. and I just see it as a doorway. But you guys will see eventually what I put out there, and either Ben will come as a private citizen and say I hate all your bills, and then he will move on. We will move on.
Madam Chair, you know that I always tell you when I hate your bills. But I can also assure you that Gaming Control and the Gaming Commission is absolutely committed to protecting our consumers, right? Protecting the visitors that come to our state, the people who that play within our state, ensuring that they are able to wager safely and in a stable environment is of critical concern to the regulatory structure of gaming in the state. So we're certainly aligned on that front.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, so that moves us to agenda item number 7, the scheduling of future meetings. Super important. We have had a lot of conversation. We only have one conversation left. If you guys have BDR ideas for the interim committee, we would like to have those. What did I say, Russell? By the end of June?
August.
Oh, I really want the end of June. So if you could be thinking about your BDR ideas that you would like to be a part of the interim committee, start turning those over. I personally think if you probably know what you want to do. You need to submit those within the next, I would say 30 days, because our next presentation will be on the property tax, and that'll be our last one. And then the following one after that will be what are the interim BDRs that we're going to consider and bring forward for session in 23. So we've talked about a lot, and there's been a lot of nuance. And so if there is an issue, please send to Russell, Joe, and Michael, so we can review that list and then know what we're putting forward and have discussion and some conversation. And we'll do that I would like to do that in our July meeting, to have conversations on your BDRs. I mean, if it's August, it's fine, but try to get them in. Do any of you guys actually have BDR ideas that you? Yay. Okay. We're in a good place. Okay, then. So then you have stuff to turn in. All right, then. Senator Tatro, you have any ideas? Or are you just like, no?
Yeah, I'm mulling a few. I'm wondering how to get them through the chair.
Okay, just send them to fiscal.
Will do.
Okay. All right, then. So as always, Anna will send out the next meeting. It will be in June. It will be on property tax. We're trying to figure out what that agenda looks like. Try not to do too much in that because it's a big topic, but trying to get also some issues that are popping up in the space. And so with that, we will move to agenda item number 8, which is public comment.
Madam Chair, go public comment. I see you have a few hands up, but
okay. Go ahead.
I'll put my hand up.
Sorry. Okay.
So just maybe to help staff and Anna that for the June meeting, given that it's close to the end of the May here, if you want to continue sort of that Wednesday, Thursday, or that Thursday meeting, would we be considering we're polling the members for like the 29th and 30th, which would be the last Wednesday and Thursday? Because I think it might be a pretty tight term to consider having the meeting on the 22nd or 23rd, given the property tax and the people we have to line up for the presentations and such. So we could talk about it more later if necessary, but I appreciate you staff allowing me to maybe bring that up while we have all the members here, that those are the dates that you're looking at as the 29th or 30th. And so Anna then can send out an email asking the members for their availability on those days. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Thank you.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you. So I I didn't feel that I needed to bring it up during the presentation, but I share some of the concerns that you brought up. I'm wondering if there is any sort of information from, oh, I can't remember what entity it was that presented to us that was from, I think, of the National Council of Legislators, or maybe it was a different group that presented to us on other topics. I think it was 2 meetings ago.
NCSL.
NCSL. Okay. If there's any sort of information that we could also get from the crypto, just from the other states, because the little bit, very, very little information that I did with Dr. Google, which by the way is not always the best researcher, there was a large amount of commercialized articles that came out that were very slanted, either pro or con, but very slanted. So just wondering if there's any sort of information that we can get from NCSL or other listservs and everything that we can get on this topic, because I agree with you that it's probably going to come up again, and I just have big concerns about it. So
yes, there was a presentation on SALT, which is the State and Local Taxation Committee. It's the national committee, and there was a presentation from the Washington Revenue Office. I can ask them for that presentation. I haven't seen it become public, but get it sent over to you, so you could read what I guess he put out or what Washington State's doing. I think there were 3 or 4 states that have done something, but I'll find out from Jackson and then get it turned over.
Thank you so much. That'd be wonderful. Thanks.
Any other questions before we go to public? Okay, Assemblywoman Considine.
If we are getting some more information on cryptocurrency, can we maybe throw in like sustainability environmentally wise, because the research that I've been doing, it seems to be incredibly energy driven and uses a lot and like enormous amounts. I'm just wondering about the sustainability of it, and if there's any long-term ideas about how to make it sustainable without using like the gross energy product of Argentina every week.
Okay, I will ask and see what they have. Anything else? Okay. All right, so that Mr. Gendon, anything?
No, I just wanted to say thanks for the presentations, especially I think as your taxation staff, as legislative staff to the revenue and taxation committees, that's one of the important issues that, and we've been asked to look at or think about this, is that the private sector can go forward, and then there'll be those that are regulated at the state or federal level, in terms of making that decision to use cryptocurrencies. But at the state and local government level, I don't think there's many states that are going to allow taxes to be calculated and or remitted using cryptocurrencies. Because Mr. Barbie's comment on that point is because unless it's a cryptocurrency that's tied and pegged to a currency such as a US dollar, so that a dollar is a dollar, that would always be the risk that the tax is calculated on $100 of crypto or it's remitted in crypto. And by the time the state could get it and use it, it's gone from $100 down to $80 in value, but it could also go from 100 to up to 120. So you would be subjecting your general fund revenue sources, those taxes tied to things where goods and services are being paid for or accepted in crypto. And so that, I just think that would be one of the big issues that's going to have to be resolved. And so you can see from the San Francisco Fed that there are some of these, it's the stable coin, that may be more viable because you can get them pegged to something that $1 is $1. For those that honor $1, that they would cause your staff concerns and probably elected officials about, well, somebody paid a tax in $1 and it's now worth 80 cents. And so that's not probably a good way to run a tax system for funding state operations. And so that's just, this will work itself out. And then, Madam Chair, the last comment I want to make is, as part of the discussions as you were going through this with the San Francisco Fed and the Gaming Control Board, is The distinction when crypto is money, right? It's being used as money versus when it's being used as an asset or property or intangible property, because it can be used for both. I can try and invest in it and hold it and hopefully get a capital gain, not a loss off of it. But I can also then use it as money. But it's no different in some sense than I could also do that with pesos, German marks, the euro, the British pound, right? That I can try and hedge against those as a currency. And so that's, as an economist, that's how I look at this, is that this thing is functioning as money or currency for groups of people, however large those groups may be, but it's also being used as an asset or property. And so from that perspective, then tax considerations can come into play when it may be property being used for asset or purposes versus it's being used as currency to conduct activity with regards to people producing goods and services and then people buying those goods and services. So I just wanted to offer that as your staff to the committees, as legislative staff. This is a very interesting issue, and I think it is something that the Nevada Legislature will have to be dealing with going forward, because it's not going away. So,
Agreed.
of course, that's my opinion, and no one else's in LCB for that matter, Madam Chair.
Well, we know that your opinion matters, Mr. Gindin. And so when you retire and you come back and you sit at the table and you object, we will be looking forward to all of that.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, when I'm bringing testifying in support of cryptocurrency bills. So.
Oh my God. All right. Please don't do that. But okay. So, all right. So now we will move on to agenda item number 8, public comment. Broadcast, is there anyone on the line for public comment?
Chair, the public line is open and working, and there are no callers.
All right, then. Well, then we are going to move to adjournment. Everybody have a good Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.